Hello everybody, I'm Andy Agathanglou. I'm the Transparency Task Force founder. In case there's anybody on the session who doesn't know much about us, I'll briefly explain who we are and what we do. So we are an international community that is dedicated to helping to reform the way the financial industry works. Our whole purpose is about promoting reform of the financial industry. We do this by way of a strategy for driving change, which I'll briefly explain. Our strategy for driving change is all about bringing together the thinking of two groups of people. On one hand, there are those that we characterize as having a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, and also those that we characterize as having the power and the position to make change possible. And these are very, very important people that we work extremely hard to engage with. And I'm going to spend a few moments just elaborating on this Transparency Task Force strategy for driving change. And to do that, I'm going to share my screen. So I mentioned first of all, as you remember, one group are those that have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see. And what you're looking at right now is the groups page of the Transparency Task Force. We have in total 25 groups, as you can see, academics, authentic communications, banks and building societies, and so on. We also have our protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly group that you can see down here, which will obviously be the focus of tonight's symposium, or I should say today's symposium. You're not all in the UK. All of our groups obey this basic kind of principle that's set out in the quotation you can see in front of you here. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So that's why we have these groups, this cluster of 25 different groups that covering topics such as debt, governance, financial stability, protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly. It inspired our session today. In fact, this whole group, our group all about protect the wealth of the vulnerable elderly, was inspired by a presentation that Seb Elwell, one of our speakers tonight, he gave this presentation in January of last year, I think it was. And he talked about the idea that if you combine accessible wealth with that is unsupervised with people who are vulnerable, you really do have a cocktail that amounts to a great deal of risk. So our groups, as I say, are made up of people who are passionate about the change that we want to see. The other sorts of people that are important to us are those that we characterize as having the power and the position to make change possible. And what you're looking at now, ladies and gentlemen, is the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services. So this is an all-party parliamentary group that the Transparency Task Force is a secretariat for. I'm clicking on the members just to show you that we've got a healthy crop of politicians who are in this particular all-party parliamentary group. As the name suggests, they come from all different parts of the political spectrum. In other words, different politicians, different political parties, but they all have a genuine interest in helping to reform the financial system for the better. As an aside, this gentleman here, Peter Grant, was in Parliament today in a special hearing about LC&F, the failed investment scam, which caused a lot of loss for a lot of people. I'm very proud to say that myself and one of our ambassadors, Mark Bishop, were giving evidence to the parliamentary hearing that took place today that Peter Grant was one of the panelists for. So the all-party parliamentary group is run by way of a secretariat. The Transparency Task Force is the secretariat. Myself, Mark Bishop, Sue Lewis, and as you can see, many other folks who are on this page. We've also got Richard Emery speaking tonight. Richard's a knowledgeable subject matter expert on all kinds of fraud, particularly authorised push payment fraud, and he'll be speaking about that this evening. And I'll also quickly show you the second all-party parliamentary group that we run, the all-party parliamentary group on pension scams, which also has its own collection of parliamentarians on this page here. This APPG is obviously focused on one particular problem, a very big particular problem, pension scams, which it won't surprise any of you to know is a really significant problem for people in the UK, especially the vulnerable elderly, many of whom are being phoned or emailed or texted or attracted by social media into being tricked into quite literally transferring their life savings sometimes. And once again, the Transparency Task Force is the secretariat for this all-party parliamentary group. We've got lots and lots and lots of members here. I won't scroll to the bottom of the page because it will take quite some time. So just to recap, what I'm really trying to get across to you is this. The Transparency Task Force is much, much more than just a talking shop. We're here to make change happen. We have a strategy to drive change, which is, as I said earlier, about bringing together the thinking of those who have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, plus those that we believe have the power and the position to make change possible. And the two all-party parliamentary groups are particularly good examples of how we go about our work to try to influence what happens. Now, there is a specific reason why I'm mentioning the APPGs at some length today, and that is because of this. Tonight's symposium is going to initiate the beginnings of the launch of another all-party parliamentary group. We believe that the issue of vulnerable elderly people being ripped off in one way or another from one party or another is a massive public interest issue. So we are going to be, as of tonight, we are going to be bringing together the forces necessary to start to initiate a brand new all-party parliamentary group of all about protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly. And what we believe this APPG will do is bring together all the key stakeholders who have a significant interest in this topic so that we can start to influence policy making and influence government strategy around what can be done on this space. A very, very, very worthwhile initiative. So during the course of the session, I will be talking about and inviting you to put your hand forward, to step forward, so to speak, to become involved in this brand new all-party parliamentary group as part of the secretariat for it. We're also going to be inviting everybody to contribute to the development of a white paper. And the white paper is going to be about this very same topic, protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly. So the writing of the white paper and the launching of the all-party parliamentary group are going to be running side by side in parallel. One will support the other. So the plan is that by the end of the year, TTF will have its third APPG up and running. It may take just a couple of months, it may take longer than that, but certainly, I'm expecting that by the end of the year, there'll be a whole new all-party parliamentary group that we can tap into. So I hope that does set the scene. We've got some tremendous speakers tonight. We have Paul Greenwood, Ken Kivenko, Richard Emery, Seb Elwell, and we've structured the event so hopefully there's going to be an opportunity for lots of questions and comments, discussion and debate. But what I'm going to do now is just pause for a moment while I pass over to my colleague Alexandra, our head of events. And by the way, Alexandra's been doing an amazing job. We've already run 35 events so far this year. And as I think most of you know, we are a very, very small organization and we really are punching above our weight. And Alexandra's been doing an absolutely fabulous job organizing all of this. So Alexandra, I know you want to share some thoughts. Please do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and hello, everyone. So first of all, just to let you know that we are recording this session and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll try and do it as quickly as possible. So once we've edited it and uploaded it, I'll send you an email to let you know where you can watch it. Also, just to ask you to please, because we won't have time to go through introductions for everyone, so please use the chat to introduce yourself. Put your contact details in there, or social media details, and also just use the chat to share any thoughts you have throughout the session. I'll circulate all the chat notes in a follow-up email tomorrow. And also, just if you use Twitter, please feel free to tweet during the event and tag us in it as well. I'll put our Twitter handle in the chat.
Very good. Thank you ever so much, Alexander. So yes, please do use the chat as a way to introduce yourselves. If you want to put your LinkedIn details or your email or whatever it is you reach out with, and don't hesitate to do that. Also, can I please make sure that everybody has got their name on the Zoom screen? So for example, we've got one gentleman there whose name is Owner. So obviously we know you're the owner of that machine you're using, but please do change it. If you don't know how to, don't worry, just put your name into the chat now, and Alexander will change it for you, okay? So I'm sure we'll get that sorted out one way or another. Okay, so just recap. This is more than just an event. It's a symposium that's going to trigger the creation, we plan, of the new all-party parliamentary group on protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly. We also want people to, as well as volunteer, to be part of that, to actually volunteer to be part of writing a white paper, which will capture all the wonderful thought leadership that's going to be shared tonight around what can be done to help reform the system so that the elderly are better protected. I hope that sets the scene quite nicely. So Mr. Paul Greenwood, please take it from there. As you know, you've got roughly 10 minutes plus, say, 5 minutes for Q&A. I know you've got some very important things to talk about. So Paul, please take the stage, so to speak, and dive in. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. You know, as we all know, June 15th, now we know, is a very important day. It is, in fact, World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. And several weeks ago, I was on a Zoom call with Andy, and he mentioned this seminar, and I said, oh, that's great that you're doing it in recognition of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Maybe it was coincidental, but it was meant to be. And in fact, I've just come off giving a keynote to the state of Utah. And after this one, I'm going to be flying virtually to the state of Hawaii to be part of a big event there. So this is exciting for me to be part of the London symposium. And I just want to thank all of you who registered for this. Just a little bit of background so I can give you the context from which I'm giving this presentation. I was born and raised in England and went to Leeds University, where I did my law degree. I spent 10 years as a solicitor. Before that, I tried out at Gray's Inn, but frankly, the white wig and the black gown didn't suit me quite well. So despite the disappointment of my late uncle, who was the presiding judge of Chichester Crown Court, I debarred myself and became a general solicitor. I then ended up in San Diego as a prosecutor, and the reason was because I had fallen in love with a beautiful gal from San Diego. She gave me 13 years in the UK, and then she said, please take me back to the blue skies. So I did that, and in 1991, we arrived in San Diego. I took the dreaded California bar exam and managed to convince the bar examiners that I knew more than I really did. Joined a civil law firm for 2 years, and then in 1993 got my big break. I actually was able to convince the San Diego DA's office that I needed to be a prosecutor. And so that became my career for the next 25 years. And after 3 years, I was given this brand new assignment called Elder Abuse Prosecution. And they put me in the Family Protection Division. And for 22 years, it was my responsibility to focus on crimes that were being committed against older adults. And that was it. That was everything I was doing. I was exclusively looking after that segment of the population in terms of older adults aged 65 and older, and people with physical or mental disabilities aged 18 through 64. And California, like many other states, has codified its crime of what we call elder and dependent adult abuse. And if you're interested, I'll just give you the code section. You can Google it, just put in California Penal Code 368. That is the statute that we use. And for several years, I have been imploring anyone who will listen in the UK, please, please adopt a similar statute for the UK, because it is absolutely essential that we come to grips with this insidious escalating crime. And under that code, as I said, elder and dependent adults, elders 65, and dependent adults with mental or physical limitations, restricting their ability to carry out normal activities of daily living or to restrict their ability to protect their rights. And so many of the victims that I pursued justice for in the courtroom were indeed challenged by some form of mental impairment. Many of my victims were in their 80s, 90s, sometimes 100, with various stages of dementia or Parkinson's, or specifically Alzheimer's. And so we covered all these different kind of crimes that you see here, but 65% of my cases involved some form of financial exploitation. And clearly, it's going to get worse and worse as this crime of financial exploitation escalates over the coming years. The lessons that I've learned from the 22 years in the courtroom and since my retirement 3 years ago on a wider platform has been the fact that it is a global problem. It's not limited to the USA, Canada, or the UK. It's happening even in traditional countries like Japan, where elders used to be respected. I spent 2 years in Kenya with VSO. Kenya was always a place where I could rely upon elders being respected, but not now. They're being exploited and defrauded just like they are in the UK and the USA. And this is the tragic, literal truth. Not enough cases are being identified, investigated, or prosecuted. Too often, the response that we get from police officers is it's just a civil matter. And I have spent years and years trying to battle against this misconception. And the strategy that I used with police officers was always the same. I'd say, officer, you are trained to do things that I could never do. You know how to put handcuffs on people. You know how to do a hot stop on a vehicle in the street. I am not trained to do that. But what you're not trained to do is tell a family member that this is, quote, just a civil matter. Or there is a failure to recognize elder exploitation as a specific crime. And the fact that exploitation doesn't just impact elders financially. The truth is, it impacts older adults in so many other ways. Emotionally, physically, their health can be impacted, and in maybe the way they are conducting their future lives. I've had, unfortunately, too many cases of where victims of financial exploitation have ended up probably dying prematurely. You know, the US Centers for Disease Control has called it now a health hazard for older adults who are victims of financial exploitation. And so, unfortunately, we talk about pension fraud, and I'm so glad to see all these committees that are now rising up within the House of Commons. But we've got to understand the true impact of these devastating crimes. And this happened in the UK a couple of years ago. 4 victims committed suicide after discovering that they had lost their life savings to such a scam. So this is so serious. It is a violent crime, and we've got to convince all the legislatures this is the truth. So I believe with my whole heart that other countries should adopt an elder abuse criminal statute. But why now? Well, if you believe the headlines, then we are all in for a major challenge. I mean, look at these. These are now in mainstream media all the time. It is a growing, escalating problem within our communities. And it is indeed, since the pandemic, since the enforced isolation of so many vulnerable older adults, it's happening more and more frequently. Upticks all over the place in elder financial exploitation. So the case for my argument for codifying elder abuse is this. I know it would require parliaments all over the world to provide a definition of what we mean by elder exploitation. But why not? Because in so many countries, we already have laws that define child abuse, human trafficking. The UK has just gone through discussing and debating domestic violence. And we've had a stalking statute on the books in the UK for years. So why not have one for elder exploitation? It would require all of us to pursue justice for what many believe are a forgotten generation. So 18 years ago, this report came out from the House of Commons Health Committee. And they talked about it being an ignored problem. And that was 18 years ago. Where have we come since then? What has changed? What moves have been made? And I see some light at the end of the tunnel with what Andy is telling us. And I think we've all get on board and be part of the solution and be part of this action committee to persuade those in power that this needs to change. Some of the collateral benefits about having such a standalone law: number one, it raises awareness of this problem within the wider community. It might also act as a deterrent to a potential perpetrator if they realize that we are focusing on this as a specific crime. And training to law enforcement, to prosecutors, to social workers will hopefully reduce barriers to successful investigation of prosecution. 3 barriers: the victim won't be a good witness in the courtroom because they say they're going to be forgetful. But I don't believe that. I believe that age doesn't make us forgetful. Having way too many things to do makes us forgetful. And we put in these stereotypes of what we believe by being older adults. This is wrong. And then this response, which I talked about already, it's just a civil matter because he gave the money voluntarily. But I've learned that things aren't always how they first appear. I mean, take this picture and you go, well, what type of bird is it? But if you look more closely, you realize it's somebody standing there or sitting on a tree stump with their hand over their head. Because what I'm trying to say is that there are times when what appears to be consensual has in fact been diluted by fraud, undue influence, or by taking advantage of the mental limitations of the victim. This is also a major problem. Victim declines prosecution. No, that should never be allowed. We've got to understand that if we allow the perpetrator to get away with it because the victim declines prosecution, then it's only going to cause the perpetrator to do it again to somebody else. And we've proved time and time again with domestic violence that we can get a guilty verdict without the victim's cooperation. Also, having such a standalone law might also form mandated reporters who should be in that category. Not just police officers, not just medical personnel, social workers. I think every employee of every bank, building society, credit union should be a mandated reporter of suspected vulnerable elder exploitation. If we could stop the flow of money at the source in the institution because of trained bank tellers who are asking the appropriate questions, then a lot of this can be avoided and suicides and heartache can be avoided. Also, such a law would encourage a multidisciplinary team approach. And that's what I'm calling for today. To have, for example, all over the UK and across the world, FAST teams, financial abuse specialist teams. Because you know what I've learned? It takes all of us to keep our vulnerable adults safe. It's not just things that we do on our own, it's doing it together is so much more effective. You know, I'm about to wing my way virtually to Hawaii, and this is one of the images that I bring from Hawaii is when we're in a canoe, an outrigger, and we're all rowing in the same direction at the same time. It's amazing the progress we can make. So would you be willing to either form or get involved in a multidisciplinary team in your jurisdiction? Because such a law would also force judges and the legal system to pay much more attention to the needs of these older, vulnerable victims. We've got to make our courts more elder friendly. And for example, give resources to the courts on effective collaboration on elder abuse, giving priority to certain financial elder abuse trials so that we can get the victim into court before they suffer some cognitive impairment or suffer a demise, making special accommodations for their time at the courtroom. So in summary, if I hand back to Andy to see if there are any brief questions we can take, this is what we're facing. Elder abuse thrives on silence. We have got to bring it out into the open. We've got to break the silence barrier that is being put up there. And if we're serious about protecting the wealth of our vulnerable elderly, then it is time for action. It is time for all of us to tell our legislators that we need this law. And I'm just so glad that, Andy, you demonstrated, you showed a number of members of parliament who are committed to this discussion. We've got to convince them to convince the rest of their colleagues that now is the time to put our words into action. So the spotlight, not only today, or World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, but every day should be on this insidious problem so that we do not overlook victims anymore. Reaching every victim should be our goal. And I hope that today will go some way towards addressing that issue. So Andy, here's my contact information. If people want to contact me directly, paul@greenwoodlawcorp.com or my website, greenwoodlawcorp.com. And I'll be more than happy if we have time to take one or two questions or just defer back to you. So thank you so much, Andy, for this opportunity.
Paul, thank you very, very much indeed. That was an absolutely first-class presentation. It really was a pleasure to hear the ideas and the thought leadership and the creativity, but above all else, the passion in your voice about what you are talking about, because it is obvious that you really do mean every single word you said. And that's exactly what we want here. We want people with a sense of commitment and conviction, because that's the kind of energy that really can drive change. Before we do anything else, ladies and gentlemen, could I please invite you to join me in thanking Paul for that absolutely outstanding presentation. That really was excellent. And in fact, it was so good. One of the ideas we're going to do, Paul, is we're going to do a short cameo version of that very presentation aimed at the parliamentarians. We'll have you and Richard and Ken and others. Everyone speaking tonight will work together to make a short 3-4 minutes top video presentation that basically says, dear politician, here's why you ought to become part of this brand new all-party parliamentary group on protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly. So Paul, that was too good not to do that. Obviously, we're going to invite all the speakers tonight, if they wish to become members of the Secretariat to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Paul, you've just got yourself #1 place, so I'll keep asking you till you eventually say yes. So even if you go no now, believe me, I'll just keep at it. But I take your nod as a yes, please.
Yes.
That's absolutely fantastic. Wonderful. Okay, we're rocking and rolling. Amanda Hall has got her hand up. So Amanda, please take the opportunity to introduce yourself. Make yourself visible if you can by putting on your video if you can, but don't worry if you can't. Please do make your point to Mr. Greenwood. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Paul. That was really good. I'm really so I'm head of customer proposition and financial wellbeing at Smart Pension. So I'm constantly, I want a better word, campaigning, or some might say banging on about vulnerable customers, especially in a digital world. And I just wanted to understand, what's your definition of elderly? You know, is a certain age, and also obviously in the UK, certainly there's a vulnerable covers many areas, not just the elderly. And I wondered how you were dealing with that too, please.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, so California in our criminal statute defines it as elder and dependent adults. So elder is anybody over the age of 65. Mm-hmm. Speaking as a 69-year-old, I'm not too comfortable with that. I mean, I could go with 70, but they went with 65. But what was important was that I always had to prove in court that the defendant who took advantage of the elder knew or reasonably should have known that the person they were taking advantage of was over the age of 65. So there had to be a connection, some kind of knowledge or inference that they would have known that they were exploiting the assets of an older adult. Now, dependent adults was anyone aged 18 through 64 with a known physical or mental disability that affected their ability to carry out daily routines or affected their ability to protect their own rights. So for example, some of the cases I prosecuted were involving theft from a 47-year-old person with cerebral palsy. And, you know, again, learning how to do direct examination of a 47-year-old with cerebral palsy is challenging, but we need to address that because they are as vulnerable as people in their 70s and 80s.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that exchange. By the way, we know Smart Pensions very well. Andrew Evans, Rustin Smith and Co. Can you please raise your hand if you have a comment or a question you'd like to put to Paul, please? Thank you. Otherwise, it looks like we're all pretty good. I've got a question for you, Paul, myself then. My question is, what do you think is actually driving this escalation of crime in relation to the elderly? What's actually behind it? What are the underlying trends that are causing this to become a bigger and bigger problem year after year after year?
I think it's a multiple factors, and one of them has been in the last 2 years with the enforced isolation of older adults who are not being able to stay in touch with family. It is the fact that, unfortunately, a lot of people have lost their own jobs and economically are looking for ways to fill the gap. There is obviously the demographics. It's the fastest growing segment of our society are the over 85s. And when you've got the fact that so many of them need in-home care, caregiving as a job is the third fastest growing job in the United States. So when you put all those factors together, and the fact that people are tempted to see people with maybe early stages of cognitive impairment, and how easy it is to get them to sign something, to transfer something, or literally steal something from right in front of their nose, and believe that they're going to get away with it, this temptation becomes almost overwhelming for so many people. And also the introduction of iPads and laptops and desktop computers to seniors, which is fantastic for all of us, but it provides another element for the perpetrator to become involved and to defraud somebody who is not so sophisticated with how the internet works.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Chance for one or two more. Mr. Ian Ashley, go for it, sir. Please introduce yourself first, Ian, and take yourself off mute. Thank you.
I'm Ian Ashley. I've been a compliance professional in the UK for longer than I'm willing to admit. Interesting comments, and I won't argue with anything you said. I think I've been talking actually over the last few days at work, putting together a vulnerable client policy. And one of the things we've been speaking about is bereavement. It's all very well to say, yeah, well, as try and phrase this nicely. People suffer, impairment as the aging process takes over, but there's a great big cliff edge that happens with bereavement, whether it's the death of a spouse, or even, for those lucky, death of a parent in sort of later years where there's longevity happening. And I think that's something that maybe, I'm not saying is overlooked, but you suddenly have a bereavement, maybe you have a life policy paying out, and suddenly you've got this lump sum. And how do we then think about protecting those people from predation when that is there to last them the rest of their lives?
That's a really interesting point, Ian. I've never thought about that, but of course you're right. So you've got somebody who's suffered a bereavement, a death in the family, could be a spouse, could be a parent, could even be even worse, a child. As well as the emotional shock of the bereavement, there's also potentially a financial consequence. It could be the paying out of a lump sum from a life assurance policy, perhaps, or an endowment, or the inheritance of something. And that creates this kind of perfect storm that Seb Elwell describes in the fire triangle. Paul Greenwood, any thoughts or comments about that? Any particular thoughts or insights in terms of the significance of bereavement for elderly people, making it even more vulnerable for them to be abused financially or otherwise?
Yes, and in fact, the vast majority of my victims, unfortunately, were widows. And at the time of the bereavement, obviously emotionally, they feel very fragile. And unfortunately, so often the perpetrator is a family member. There is a life policy that is being cashed in. Maybe the bad son or daughter has made themselves executor of the will, and then has an opportunity to really take advantage of all that being an executor involves. So I've seen that time and time again, and then unfortunately too late, the other siblings only discover it because they've not paid too much attention to widowed mother, whereas bad son or daughter has been doing all the manipulation over the last 12, 14 months or so. So yes, I think it behooves all of us to make sure that if we know somebody within our own family who is suffering a bereavement, that we take special care and make sure that the financial institution is aware of the bereavement. They probably are, but if not, let them know so they can pay special attention to any unusual transactions that appear on their screen.
Fantastic. This is great insight. We really do have wonderful expertise with us this evening. We go from one expert, Paul Greenwood, to another, Mr. Richard Emery, who's got his hand up. He'd like to say something. Richard,
Thank you. I just want to pick up on that very point, because I dealt with a lady who had lost her husband of many years. She'd moved out of the family home into a smaller apartment. She'd managed to transfer all the bills, the community charge, the gas, the electricity. And then she got an email saying, you haven't paid your TV license. You must pay it by tonight. If you don't pay it by tonight, then you will be committing a criminal offence. That actually was a phishing exercise. So she paid her TV license, and an hour later, her bank, who of course was not her bank, phoned her up, and she ended up transferring all the money from her account to a new safe account that wasn't safe. But it was all on the basis that her husband had dealt with all the bills in the past, and she thought she'd done everything right. So that's, you know, just a practical life experience. And she's, you know, I just quote that one because it's one which is very fresh in my mind. So yeah, Paul, absolutely excellent presentation. You are right there in terms of what's going on here. And I think this point, that particularly where a spouse dies and the surviving spouse, the surviving partner, now gets a significant amount of money, that is so liable for exploitation. Yeah, excellent presentation. Thank you, Paul.
Richard, I think we all agree with that. And I noticed that Michaela put a point in the chat as well. I'll just read it out in case you haven't all seen it yet. Michaela says sometimes the women who lose their husband have no idea about handing money or investments, as the husband took care of everything. And that's so true, you know. So this person that's left behind is in a really vulnerable position. Of course, it could be the female, it could be the male. The fact is there's been this shake-up as a consequence of a bereavement, causing this very, very damaging cocktail of circumstances. It really is not difficult to understand why this kind of financial abuse of the elderly is becoming a bigger and bigger problem in society. We'll check in to see if anybody else would like to make a point at this stage. Please just raise your hand or wave it so I can see it. It looks like we're all good. So what we're going to do now is two things simultaneously. On one hand, we're going to be saying thank you very much indeed to Mr. Paul Greenwood, and we're also at the same time going to be welcoming our next speaker, Ken Kivenko, all the way in Canada. Like Paul, like Richard, like everybody else speaking tonight, Ken is a wonderfully informed and insightful man. I know you're going to enjoy listening to Ken's speech as well. But first of all, let's invite Ken to the stage, so to speak, and also say thank you once again for a first-class presentation by Mr. Paul Greenwood. Thank you very much indeed, both of you. Thank you. Very, very good stuff. You've really got things rocking and rolling for the session, Paul. Well done, and enjoy your trip all the way to Hawaii or wherever it is you're going to later. Mr. Kivenko, exactly. Mr. Kivenko, time to take the stage. Thank you, Ken. Please introduce yourself. We're good for time, so take your time and dive into what you'd like to share. Thank you, Ken.
The last 22 years after I retired, so you can imagine I'm senior, been dedicated to helping people getting their money back from financial institutions. It happened way back when a family member had a problem in Montreal. I passed away, and there was a whole issue there with the legacy, and I had always been led to believe it was about 900,000. And when I went to help the person with the will, it was about 140. And I investigated it, and needless to say, we went after the company, and it took about 9 months, and we got it all back. But after that, I said, that's it. I'm going to concentrate on helping people with that. That's what we do. We handle people's complaints. We're totally free, no charge. About 200 volunteers across Canada in every province. We have focused lately, the last 2 years, on seniors and vulnerable investors. What we're finding is that the reported results, and today the Ontario Securities Commission and the Canadian Securities Administrators put out reports on elders, and they said that something like 70 to 80% are from family members of elder abuse, financial abuse. I can only say this, that I don't really argue with that a lot comes from family, but I tell you, there's plenty coming from the industry. The problem with the problems in the industry is that it's unreported and undetected. So many times people will call me. Luckily now we're getting a lot of calls before they get into trouble, and they'll say, my advisor has said that I should change my account from a commission account to a fee-based account, which means that instead of each transaction charging $150 or $200, they will just pay a flat percentage. In our case, the worst one we got was 2.25%. So they go from 5 transactions a year at $150, so $750 to 2.5% of $1.5 million. So we call that, I think in the US, they call it reverse churning. Now we've got 5, 6 calls a week like that. So this is millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars. And it would not normally, you wouldn't see that in any statistics. So one of the things I've asked now that I'm joining the Seniors Investor Committee at the OSC, Ontario Securities Commission, I've said we better start accumulating industry statistics on age, the nature of the events, and also start passing some rules that regard IPOs, initial public offerings, reverse churning, turning people into fee-based accounts, and several other items like that where seniors are really good targets. Seniors with investing tend to have above average income, savings in their accounts, so they're especially vulnerable. Another issue that we see, and it's not even deliberate from the industry, it's ignorance. They do not have the training or proficiency on how to manage what we call a deaccumulating account. They're used to growth accounts, invest for growth, buy these companies. These are the ones that are, the best. They do not seem to be proficient in handling what effectively is a pension plan. So they're really, and they don't have the math. They definitely do not have the math. So they're still doing 60-40 portfolios, maybe 50-50, saying it's, well, we'll cut back on equity. But the people really want, and they don't really, the forms don't allow them to write it down properly, what their objective is. And most of them they only have a chance, tick off growth, risk, but there isn't something that actually says in monthly income. So they tick off what they tick off because that's all that's there. They pick out the least damaging, but it's still too strong. So we find that when we end up, and it's very rarely in court, we win most of our cases at the first meeting with the firm's legal counsel. And by the way, we end up with legal counsel immediately after the first phone call. The next call is with a lawyer. So the banks and the stockbrokers are they understand what's going on. But we're very successful. In our case, the simple case was actually last week. It was $750 versus, I think, 2.5 million times 2.5%. So it was a no-brainer. It was very few transactions. They had bonds, government certificates, and dividend-paying stocks, safe stuff, bank, Bell Telephone, and so on. And they ended up paying 10, 15, 20 times as much in fees. Well, if you have 10 years left and you lose 2.5% due to that fee, you're losing a lot, especially if returns in the future are only going to be, who knows what, 3 or 4%. And taxes are going to be high in the West because of all the government debt. So there won't be much left over for savings. So these are the kind of things we see. There is, of course, outright fraud, what we call personal financial dealing, where the advisor will say, look, my wife's sick. Would you be able to loan me $150,000? Then they do, but it's never documented. They forget about it, and the $150,000 disappears. Another one we're seeing the last year during COVID is wonderful opportunities in real estate and other companies where they ask the people to invest what they call off book. So the broker, dealer is not involved, but they do a side deal all along, though, that people think they're dealing with, the Bank of Nova Scotia brokerage, but they're really dealing with an individual. So 90% of those end up bankrupt. They never really were good deals. So first thing I'm going to be asking is accumulation of statistics and the nature. Unfortunately, our regulators do not do a good job on enforcement of these cases for a lot of reasons that I think was mentioned by Paul. It's not just police that don't enforce that well. The securities regulators are a little bit timid in that area as well. They treat it as a family affair, or it's off book. You should have known it. You should have been knowing. He didn't have, you had the meeting outside the office. You should have known. You're stupid. They actually I have recorded calls where they tell them they were stupid. An 81-year-old widow, the firm's law department, compliance department told them that. So anyways, needless to say, we won those cases, but sometimes we do have to go to court. And there we have to get lawyers. We will handle up to about $200,000. The Ombudsman for Banking Services in Canada doesn't have a binding decision mandate. So it can only go to 350, and they do get rejections. They call them lowball settlements. So unlike the UK FOS, they cannot demand payment. They can recommend it, and the banks say, thank you very much. And they go to the person and say, look, you can keep on yelling and screaming, but we're not going to agree to that number. So what you can do is in the next half hour, agree to about 30% on the dollar. You'll have a check tomorrow. If you don't, you'll have to see us in court. So the Ombudsman can't do anything about that. They do report once in a while. They do case studies and they show it. There was one of a widow, not a senior, maybe a senior, but 62, with a handicapped child, and the company refused. Now, these case studies do not name the company, but they said it was a bank-owned dealer. So it's not the little dealers. It's some of the worst offenders are from the banks. So our goal is to try and get legislation passed to have what they call the trusted contact. If a dealer suspects something, or a compliance officer, some of them find out. The compliance officers would speak out, but they're afraid because if they stop a payment and it's a mistake, they could be liable. So we're trying to get a no-fault provision that if you act in good faith to try and prevent a bad thing and it turns out it really wasn't a bad thing, you're going to be held harmless. That's not on our books in Ontario or any province right now. So those are the kind of things we're fighting. Also, complaint handling, my last point, it's atrocious. They will tell people, look, it sounds bad, but you signed it. You agreed to borrow that amount of money. You were greedy. You said you had a risk tolerance of medium to high. What you were given was medium to high. It didn't work out. And so your complaint is rejected. We get a 90% rejection rate before we get involved, and we get about 100% approval rate after we get involved. So that tells me there's something really wrong. The Ombudsman reports about 40%. So 40% of the cases that go to an Ombudsman get overturned and the dealer is held accountable. And 60% apparently they hold the person responsible. But whatever it is, whether it's 80% or 40, it should be, if the system was in a state of control, it would be 2%. These are statistically unreasonable numbers. So it means there's underlying root causes. So that's what our goal is, to try and work on the banks and the dealers, some of the insurance companies too, but mostly we're seeing the banks and the investment dealers are doing things that really may not constitute fraud, but are equivalent to it. And as some person said, the scandal isn't what's illegal, the scandal is what's legal. And that's a big problem for us, because a lot of the rules you could drive a truck through and you can interpret them many ways. So our objective is to try and work with the regulators. Canadian politicians are known for being close to the banks, almost impossible to get anything going in Canada if it involves any impact on a bank. So we're going to try and work with regulators. We work with media. We work with law firms. We work with class action lawyers, where we file class actions on behalf of a whole class of people. Of course, they take 15% or 20%, but at least we get some justice. But we've had to be very creative. We work with media, try to get these stories exposed. Guerrilla warfare really is what we're doing. We've been successful at it so far. Obviously, when I heard the story that my photo was on the wall of a downtown office of the bank as target practice, we felt that was the ultimate achievement. But it's really quite serious. The people do get depressed. We do have cases of drug overdose. A lot of them hide the fact that they were scammed because they're embarrassed or ashamed, and they actually keep it from the family. So a lot of problems to overcome, but it does have to become a priority. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse and worse due to demographics. So that's my 2 cents.
Ken, thank you so much. We heard that pretty well. Thank you very, very much indeed. Can we once again please show our speaker our appreciation for what he just shared? Again, so much insight, so much wisdom, and 22 years of experience just put into the last 10, 15 minutes or so. Superb, absolutely superb. Ken, I'm sure there's going to be 1 or 2 questions and comments. Let me go to gallery view so I can see everybody. Please just raise your hand, or digitally or otherwise, if you'd like to make a point to Ken. We can see Michaela. Hi, Michaela. Lovely to have you with us. It's great to have you at lots and lots of our events. Please do take yourself off mute, Michaela. Introduce yourself. Tell everybody where you are, and then put your point to Ken. Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm in Toronto, just like Kiev. And I did work in the industry. I started as a quant and risk manager. And but I have a good, how can I say, BS detector. What happens, and Ken, I don't know if you notice that, but a very legal and advertised scam is the one of the reverse mortgage. There is a system where you are elderly, you own this house, and real estate is expensive here. So the bank offers you a deal, so they pay you money every month, and somehow they take you the house. This is a total scam. I mean, if you put the numbers and if you know a bit how to calculate things. And the problem is that it is legal. Moreover, it is advertised. We have a classical music station, 96.3 FM, which is targeted to elderly rich. So it's right up there, the advertisement for this, and it is actually even promoted by CARP, which is Canadian ARP, so it's like ARP, but in Canada. And it's endorsed. I don't know how they got this endorsement. So this is a big, how can I say, a scam, in my opinion. And I don't know what can be done to stop it. Another thing that that Ken, you did mention, it is this risk tolerance. So whenever they have a new client, part of KYC for the investment, so in your file, it will be a risk assessment. So it is 4 or 5 pages. And part of those questions is, would you be comfortable if you lose 5% per year or something like that? So you have to put which percentage you are comfortable. But this is actually not at all used in order to construct your portfolio, but it is just used to cover their ass. So when you lose that, when your portfolio goes down those percentages, they come and put in front of you that questionnaire that you filled, and they say, look, you here said that you will be okay to lose whatever. So that's another problem. Okay, I leave others to...
Thank you, Michaela. You raised 2 very interesting points. Ken, anything you'd like to say in response to what Michaela...
Well, on the risk tolerance, she's absolutely right. When I was on the investor advisory panel of the commission, we funded a study on risk tolerance measurement. And it found, and it's still posted on the Ontario Securities Commission website, I think it was 78% of risk tolerance questionnaires were unfit for use. In other words, they didn't ask the right questions. They didn't ask enough of the questions, and they didn't know how to interpret the answers. So that was a real condemnation. They also found that many people, advisors, dreamt up the questionnaires. The firms did not control the process. They just dreamt it up. They all of a sudden became psych experts. And that is a report that was done about 4 years ago. No change that I can see on Canadian risk tolerance questionnaires in the investment area at all. There's been no improvement whatsoever. So she's absolutely right. That is used against you because some of the buckets are, low to medium. It's gentle sounding. You don't quite get a feeling what you're signing off to. When you go to file a complaint, they say, well, low to medium means you could lose 28%. They just come up with that. Well, someone on fixed income losing 28% in 1 year and retired is not going to make it back. So risk measurement at the point of getting advice is really bad in Canada. I don't know where it is elsewhere, but it was basically unfit for use.
Yeah.
And it has not changed since that report was issued.
Thank you, Ken. And Michaela also commented about reverse mortgages. Any thoughts about that? Michaela's view is obviously that they're bad and they kind of shouldn't be marketed. What are your thoughts there?
It is legal. She's absolutely right. It is legal. In the US, I got the US channels here. I forget the guy's name, famous actor in charge of, he's the commissioner of police on Blue Bloods, the TV program. So he's the guy running the ad for reverse mortgages.
Right.
So, and they've also teamed up with their equivalent, the American Association of Retired Persons. Obviously, this is very, very profitable. We aren't even trying to tackle that. We have enough trouble dealing with controversial ones and illegal. We can't tackle the ones that are legal, but there's just nothing we can do about it. I don't know what's going on in the UK or elsewhere. It's very prominent in North America.
Very interesting indeed. We're going to go to Seb Elwell, who put his hand up, and I think Seb's a perfect person to comment on this from a UK perspective. Seb, please introduce yourself and make your point. Thank you.
Hi, Seb Elwell. I'll be speaking later, so I'll do the proper introduction then. I think in the UK we call a reverse mortgage an equity release mortgage. Yeah. We too have celebrities going on TV advertising them. And the FCA has sort of raised questions about the risk of significant harm where advice is not being properly conducted. SOLA, the Society of Later Life Advisors, have released a accreditation called the Later Life Lending Advisor Accreditation, where they will independently sort of check that the advisors have got the right skills, the right knowledge, the right soft skills. It is an important in some situations for some people. If you need to live in your home and you need to fund care and your house is your major asset, then that is one way of releasing money in order to do that. So there are situations where it is useful, but equally there is significant risk of harm there as well. So it needs to be treated as very, very high risk and tread very, very carefully.
Seb, thank you very much. It was actually me that I accidentally muted you. Sorry about that earlier. We have people from the society that Seb just mentioned involved in this group as well. Last chance for any final comments or questions to Ken before we move on. Mr. Adrian Tupper, please introduce yourself and make your point to Ken. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick sort of add-on to that. Yeah, I'm Adrian Tupper. I've worked in financial services for 30-odd years, but I'm now a counsellor. On these equity release, there seems to be a bit of a worrying trend where they're being pushed so that one generation can fund the house purchase of the next generation, or probably two generations further on. With the inevitable consequence, it's just going to pump the housing market up even more than it's pumped already. And I just wonder where all this is going to stop. I have seen sort of, I don't know whether it's direct advertisements. I'll be interested to know if anybody else is out there, but certainly anyone else has seen any out there, but certainly sort of in columns and on social media, people saying, well, this seems to be the trend that advisors are saying they should go down now in order to get funding for their first time buys.
I understand. I can see exactly how market forces are going to be making that happen in the UK with property prices being what they are, and parents wanting their kids to get their own home, and the kids wanting to get their own home, you can see how it's going to happen. Thank you very much indeed, Adrian, for making that point. What we're going to do now, folks, is again, we're going to thank our last speaker, Ken Kivenko, while simultaneously welcoming our next Richard Emery to the floor. So can we please put our hands together again for Ken and say hi to Richard? Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful. We're learning a lot. I'm certainly learning a lot. And also, I should definitely gladly mention, I'm so pleased we've already got enough volunteers to get the all-party parliamentary group off the ground. So thank you very much indeed to everybody that's volunteered already. I'll repeat the question I put in the chat, and if you haven't yet had a chance to respond to that question about whether you'd like to be in the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group on protecting the wealth of the vulnerable elderly, then please do let me know. So let's go to Richard Emery. Richard, please start at the beginning with your introduction and go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone. So Richard Emery, I run my own consultancy under the title of 4 Keys International. My background is in retail systems, payment systems, expert witness in criminal and civil proceedings, primarily around fraud. For the last 7 or 8 years, I've been assisting people to challenge their banks, take cases to the Financial Ombudsman Service, take cases to court where they have been the victims of bank fraud. My current work profile is almost exclusively high value authorized push payment fraud. So that's where I'm coming from. And what I want to do this evening is to just deal with 2 very quick points on protecting the vulnerable from authorized push payment fraud. Now, I appreciate what was said earlier about vulnerable being over a particular age or people who have at some point some form of limited mental capacity. I'm actually taking a very much wider view of the word vulnerable, because it would cover things like somebody who's actually just got a young child. And therefore, when they get a phone call from the fraudster, then their attention is on needing to feed the child, needing to deal with a family situation. So there are situations where people will be more vulnerable than other times. But I think the primary issue, as far as I'm concerned, is vulnerability of those people who do not have someone living with them, those people who are primarily single, and therefore there's particular comments that come around that. Now, what I want to do is start by introducing this by reference back to something called the BSI Code of Practice, PAS 17271 from 2017. And what this says is the way that organizations treat customers can also contribute to levels of financial harm. Inadequate systems and procedures that fail to inform and protect and support customers can exacerbate existing customer vulnerabilities, making it more likely that fraud or financial abuse will result in financial harm. So what I want to look at is, what are the banks not doing? What could the banks be doing to minimize, to reduce the risk of harm before that harm comes about? And I'm just going to put forward 2 straightforward proposals. The first one is second party notification. We all know that when we create a new payee, when we authorize a high value payment, we get emails, we get text messages. My proposal is that every account holder, and specifically those who consider themselves to be vulnerable, will be able to authorize the bank to copy those notifications to a second party. Now, that second party could be a son or daughter, it could be a carer, but it's up to the individual to say, I want you, my bank, to send a copy of this message. Now, we had an elderly mother, and we know that she was making some poor financial decisions. She was creating payments, she was creating new payees. This proposal does not give the second party any authority at all over the account. It is merely about alerting them to what is going on. It is merely a notification, but it means, and I've talked to quite a number of people over the last few weeks on this, and people have said to me, if I had known that my mum, my dad, the person I'm caring for, if I had known that they were doing this, I could have stepped in and I could have stopped it from happening. So that's the first and very, very simple proposal. It is a safety net. However, for that safety net to work properly, we need part 2 of the proposal, because we're now into our faster payment system. So somebody can create a new payee, can send £20,000 to that payee, and albeit their son, their daughter, their carer gets a notification they've done it, but actually that's too late because the money's gone. So therefore, the second part of the proposal is 24-hour payment delay. So when primarily it's the starting point, and I will expand on this, but the starting point is when a new payee is created, we can actually say to the bank forever, not at the time, we say to the bank forever, I want to go to my bank and say, whenever a new payee is created on my account, you are not to release any high value payment for a clear 24 hours after the payee has been created. That first 24 hours is recognized as the high risk period, because of course, if you get contacted by somebody who you believe is your bank, somebody who is impersonating your bank, and incidentally, impersonation of the bank, the police and other authorities accounts for 33% by value of authorized push payment fraud. So if you get phoned by somebody who you believe is your bank and you then authorize, say, an account transfer, we need to be able to intervene in that process before it actually happens. So those are the 2 essential elements. So it's notification and a 24-hour payment delay. Now, I know that people are going to react by saying a 24-hour payment delay is going to be incredibly inconvenient. So here is my question. And I've purposely not done a PowerPoint presentation because I want to be able to see people's reactions to this question. When was the last time you made a payment of more than £500 to somebody to whom you had never made a payment before and did not have their payee details at least 24 hours before they needed the money? Now put your hand up if you can come up with a situation where you had to make a payment of more than £500 to somebody and you had to make the first payment to them within 24 hours of them giving you the payment details. Now I'm going to actually say, if I may, Andy, Kirsty, can you take yourself off mute?
Yeah, sure. Mine's a bit of an extreme example. I'm getting married in a couple of weeks, so that's the only reason that I've had to do that recently.
Right, but let me be precise. Right, Kirsty, who were you paying?
My DJ for my wedding.
Right, when did you book your DJ?
A year ago.
Right, your DJ therefore could have given you the payment details, and you would have had those payment details more than 24 hours before you actually needed to make the payment.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, you're correct. Apologies.
Sorry, Kirsty, I'm not picking on you because I spend my life actually challenging. So I'm waiting for somebody in this audience to come up with the one situation that will actually mean you have to contact the bank by phone to get the authorization. Looks like Andy's putting his hand
Andy's
up.
Going, yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's the answer to your question, but I remember we bought a car a few years ago and we weren't sure whether we were going to buy it or not until we saw it, but we did see it and we liked it, we bought it, and there was a sense of kind of, we need to buy it now, otherwise he's going to get other people round. So that felt like
Andy, I love it because you have just identified in 4 years the one question, which is buying a car from a private seller. And the answer to that has to be the same situation that we often face with banks. If we're making a high value payment, we need to phone the bank and we need to go through a security procedure to actually get the bank to authorize the payment. But everything else, people say to me, hang on a minute, I've just had to pay the money to my solicitor and I had to pay it immediately before the completion took place. Yes, but your solicitor has written to you 3 months ago because you've actually been paying fees and paying all this other money. Now, the other argument is the banks have said, and the UK Finance have said, and they said it in a TV program when they challenged me, actually, 24-hour payment delay is not permitted under the regulations. Now, I give you absolute assurance that is nonsense.
Right.
And it is nonsense for 2 reasons. Firstly, if you read the regulations say an authorized payment needs to be made by the end of the next business day. We're so used to it happening instantly that we forget what the regulations actually say. But there's something far more important than that. And that is, if I give an instruction to my bank, the bank is required to obey my instruction. Right? If I want to pay Andy £250 next Wednesday, which I'm sure he'd be very pleased to accept, I can say to my bank, pay Andy next Wednesday. They must then pay Andy next Wednesday. Therefore, if I say to my bank, if a new payee is created, do not release any payment for 24 hours, that is my instruction. Right? The bank is required to obey the instruction. So these two things are designed to allow vulnerable people, whatever their vulnerability, whatever their circumstances, to say, please bank, if I create a new payee, if I issue an instruction for a high value payment, please notify this other person. And then please delay releasing that payment for 24 hours, because that gives an opportunity for me to come out of the hot state of the fraud, and for me and for somebody else to come in and say, hang on a minute, are you really sure you want to do this? Just for once, Andy, I'm being brief. And let me end up saying, because I didn't produce slides, which was a conscious choice, right, I have asked Alexander that there's a 3-page PDF document which will be available for people, which is actually headed Protecting the Vulnerable from Authorised Push Payment Fraud.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. What a great session we're having this evening. So many really good, practical, implementable ideas. Again, let's put our hands together for our speaker, Richard Emery. Thank you very much for being, Richard. And I put a note in the chat earlier, you may not have seen it, Richard, that I think we're collecting some wonderful ideas this evening, today I should say. These are exactly the kind of ideas that we want to put in the white paper. So the white paper we're going to be writing, we're going to co-create it, will basically be a collection of ideas, exactly the sorts of things that Richard has just spoken about, which will be our kind of our cluster of thoughtful, implementable ideas that will quite literally help to protect the wealth of the vulnerable elderly. Absolutely first class. Brilliant input. Richard.
And in response to David's question he put in the chat, are banks happy to follow both these suggestions? The answer is no. They've been absolutely, certainly 24-hour payment delay. I have been in contact with the banks in UK Finance for the last 4 years. They are adamantly saying they will not do it. But the Treasury Select Committee said they believe it is something that the banks should offer.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to invite Paul Hassin. Paul, you put a very interesting point in the chat just now, Paul. If you wouldn't mind just taking yourself off mute and elaborating on the point you put in the chat, if you don't mind. So thank you.
Yes, I thought that was quite interesting, actually. I deal with a lot of vulnerable clients. I'm a trust estate practitioner, a member of STEP.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that we always use in regard to use of lasting powers of attorney is the code of practice that the banks have in regard to a mentally disabled person and their inability to make decisions. And I just wondered, rather than shooting high, I can see where the legislation would need to be, but it would also be quite an interesting thing, so maybe a softer sell to get them to adopt it, if you like, in their code of practice, which would get the ball rolling, as it were, in regard to that sort of thing. So that's where I was coming from. That was the angle I was coming from.
I heard all that, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is, my observation is, any individual bank could implement these procedures.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly frustrating, and it's why, having been talking about 24-hour payment delay for a long time, why picking it up under the vulnerability area. And let me just say this so that everybody knows. On Saturday, I posted letters addressed to the chief executives of the top 16 banks and sent them this 2-page paper. And I've told them that I'm going to be talking about it publicly tonight. I've already talked about it publicly on Times Radio this morning. And I've told the banks that I will actually report their responses to the FCA in 2 weeks' time. So essentially, I'm going after the banks to say, if you don't do this, I'm going to go very, very public that you do not care about protecting the vulnerable.
Yeah. No,
I'm really serious about this. I am absolutely fed up to the back teeth with the bank's failure to protect us. I mean, let me just throw this one else into the melting pot, if I may, Andy, if I can just take another minute.
Sure.
Right? When you go onto your bank or your bank phones you go through a security procedure. Let me ask all of you, what does that security procedure involve? It involves you proving to the bank that you are you. What does it not prove? it doesn't prove they are your bank. We have got to develop systems which are going to be consistent across every bank in the UK, so that when we talk to the bank or the bank talks to us, they confirm that they are them just as much as we have to confirm we are we. Because as I said earlier, by value, 35% of all fraud occurs for people, for individuals rather than businesses, in impersonation, and that constitutes 27% of all cases. So it's a really, impersonation is a really serious issue. But I say the paper is particularly focused on just these two issues: second party notification, 24-hour payment delay. And I'd sign up for both of them.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. I can see why you would, why a lot of people would if they had the choice. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Richard? Mr. Kivenko, I think you're waving at me. Yeah, take yourself off mute, Ken, and make your point.
What would be the penalty if the bank system or negligence or an error, if they didn't do that in 24 hours? What liability would they have?
To be honest, I don't know. But I think it's not something that's generally, you know, it's not. I think if you suffered, my understanding, and this is very thin ice. My understanding is if you instructed the bank to make a payment, and the bank did not make that payment by the end of the following business day, and you suffered loss, you could actually sue the bank for the loss. That's the way that I see it. But I've never known a case in 8 years of investigating bank fraud. I've never had a case of somebody come to me and saying, I'm complaining because the bank didn't make the payment when I told them to. But I get lots of complaints where people say the bank didn't stop me making the payment when they should have done.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ken. Any other comments or questions for Richard before we move on?
I thought Seb put his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as you were talking, I just wondered whether you'd had a conversation with the Vulnerability Registration Service.
No, I haven't, but I need to.
Database of vulnerable people.
Yes.
And it would seem to be a logical thing for you guys to have a chat.
Yeah, because if they put it out there and say, go to your bank and ask your bank for this, that's going to help put a lot of pressure on the banks.
It would. It certainly would. I can see lots of dots being joined up tonight. This is absolutely first-class stuff. Final call for any comments or questions for Richard before Mr. Vaughan Gallagher. Please do take yourself off mute.
My name is Vaughan Gallagher. I'm an ordinary retired person, over 70. I am with a group of people that went through X-amount fraud, as Richard Emery quite knows. Yeah, the banks won't play ball at all. But we also, in this country, the police aren't interested in the frauds. The insolvency services take so long to try and do anything. The FCA are more or less useless, and the ombudsman just keeps you going on for years. We lost through this X-amount construction thing. There's about 13 of us that we know of. We lost £750,000. The police weren't interested. The banks aren't. They consider that it's a legitimate company. They all change the words to suit themselves, and you know, as Richard knows, we're trying to beat that. But in England, no one seems to bother. You know, we get cold calls day after day at home, where people are trying to sell you this, that, and the other, and nobody seems to be able to stop it. And this is one of the problems.
Vaughan, thank you very much indeed. You've just, in a very passionate way, articulated such a big problem. People like yourself are being bombarded left, right, and centre, and it's just a matter of time before you get caught by something, isn't it?
That's right.
I get your point entirely, Vaughan. Thank you. We'll jump back to Richard for any final comments before we go to our final speaker for this evening, Seb Elwell. Richard, any kind of concluding comments for your piece before we pass over?
Yeah, no, I would just encourage people to start talking about this subject, talk to friends, relatives, get reaction. You know, if people have critical comments about it, about the idea, then please challenge me. You know, I will, you know, in the way, you know, hopefully I treated Kirsty fair in challenging her point. But I do want to know if there are flaws in the system. I do want to know if there are problems, because the banks need to be pushed. They need a really, really good shove. So yeah, thanks very much indeed. Thank you, everyone.
Richard, thank you very much. And I'm just going to make a quick point before we move over to Seb, which is this. Over the next roughly 2 or 3 months, there's no hurry, there's no kind of massive workload here. We're going to be putting together the white paper, which will be entitled Ideas to Protect the Wealth of the Vulnerable Elderly. It'll include Richard's ideas, Ken's ideas, the ideas we're going to hear from Seb, the ideas we heard from Paul Greenwood earlier. Please do volunteer to step forward if you want to be part of that process, because it's a really good thing to do, and it's going to help launch the new all-party parliamentary group. The idea is basically we'll publish the white paper on the same day that the new all-party parliamentary group is formally inaugurated. We'll get a bit of publicity around it, and then off we go. Thank you very much indeed, Richard. That was super duper. Can we please thank Richard and welcome Seb once again? So let's do that. Excellent, excellent. Mr. Seb Elwell, who frankly is the reason we're here this evening, because if Seb didn't speak at the event in January 2020, was it last year? We wouldn't have our Protecting the Wealth of the Vulnerable Elderly group. We therefore wouldn't be having this meeting. So Seb, it's all your fault, so to speak. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
You're going to have a short repeat of that speech, edited down to get it to fit into 10 minutes. But we've made some progress, I think, since then, some really good ideas. So I suppose I should start with saying who I am, and in the spirit of transparency, explain some of the different hats that I wear. So my day job is I'm a financial planner, and I've got a small financial planning firm providing independent advice called Switchfoot Wealth. I'm an ambassador for the Transparency Task Force. I'm a member of STEP, an estate practitioner, and the qualification I did with STEP was the STEP Diploma in Advising Vulnerable Clients, which is highly relevant to what we're talking about today. I'm an accredited advisor with SOLA, the Society of Later Life Advisors, and I'm part of their advisory board. And I'm also the Personal Finance Society's Retirement and Later Life Specialist of the Year. Alongside Switchfoot Wealth, I also started a company called Switchfoot Teams. Now, Switchfoot Teams is an app for attorneys and deputies, a program that helps you automate the production of accounts that ideally gathers financial information in real time, and then helps you sort that and produce accounts in a format that you would normally submit to the Office of the Public Guardian. And it was in my conversations around what Switchfoot Teams did and how we were using it with our clients to protect clients that a lot of these conversations kicked off, and I ended up talking to the Transparency Task Force about it. So I'm going to start off with a little definition of what is a lasting power of attorney versus a deputyship order, because the default position is a court of protection deputyship order. If you don't proactively go out and make a lasting power of attorney and choose who is going to look after your financial affairs, then the only people authorized to make decisions on your behalf is the court of protection. In most cases, there are situations where if there's a lot of an immediate pressing need to act, then that's allowed under the legislation. But for managing the finances, it's a deputyship order. That's the default position. And a deputyship order is seen as administratively very complex, seen as high cost. That may or may not be true. There's certainly a lot of delays in the system, very, very high levels of demand. But what you get with deputyship order is you get a lot of ongoing supervision from the Office of the Public Guardian. You have to, as a deputy, so the court will appoint somebody and say, yeah, you're in charge of looking after this person's finances. If they don't have capacity to do it themselves. As a deputy, you have to complete a very detailed return on all of the financial transactions which you submit to the Office of the Public Guardian, and they will scrutinise that. They will look at that and they will pull out things if they've got questions and ask and raise safeguarding concerns. And then if they find safeguarding concerns and find detriment, then one of the things you had to take out to act as a deputy is what's called a deputy bond, which Lynn Coombs would be able to tell you all about. So do make sure you make contact with her. A deputy bond is there to reimburse the estate of the person that suffered that detriment, and then the insurance company will or may try and recoup those monies from the person that's made a mistake, an honest mistake, or done things deliberately wrong. But if you take the merest hint of an action in getting a lasting power of attorney drawn up without advice, going online, then what you have is you now have a lasting power of attorney. and a lasting power of attorney is seen as administratively more simple than a debtorship bond, relatively low cost. You get to choose who your donors are. It's a very flexible document. Lots of different clauses can be added to that document, but it is largely unsupervised. There is, in theory, oversight from the Office of the Public Guardian, but only if concerns are raised. And the main problem that we have with the lasting powers of attorney is, well, how on earth can you raise concerns? How can you take safeguarding actions if you don't know what's going on? This happens behind closed doors, often within families. It's not, it is often within families, but the financial abuse or the misuse, and that's an important distinction, because people can make honest or perhaps well-intentioned mistakes that is nonetheless wrong and shouldn't have happened, but that can be dealt with separately to an outright abuse of the power. So that's the two regimes that you've got. In 2017, I nearly fell off my chair because I was listening to the radio, and it was reported that the senior judge of the Court of Protection, who'd recently retired, was going out saying, I would never sign a power of attorney. That was Senior Judge Lush, who was Master of the Court of Protection and his predecessor for 20 odd years, because of the issues and all of the things that he'd seen going wrong. And somebody of that standing making those comments, you should sit up and listen to. So we've had the lasting power of attorney regime since 2007. It replaced the enduring powers of attorney, which were seen to be inadequate. That's why they were replaced. But in 2015, something really dramatic changed. It didn't change how easy it was to abuse lasting powers of attorney. Lasting powers of attorney have always been easy to abuse, and you are highly unlikely to get caught because, well, there's no mechanism for revealing that transparency and bringing it out into the light unless you write clauses into your document in order to enable that to happen. But in 2015, George Osborne stood up and announced pensions freedoms. Hence the cliched Lamborghini there. The concern was everybody will rush out and spend all their pension savings on Lamborghinis instead of planning properly for their retirement. And we can have arguments about this, and I've seen it, and we do. In my experience, for the most part, I see people that make very, very wise decisions over their retirement funding. But what we now have is a situation where you can empty your pension fund in one transaction if you want to. Prior to 2015, the default position was you buy an annuity, which provides you with a guaranteed income for the rest of your life, however long you live. Or perhaps you had capped drawdown, which placed limits on how much you could draw out each year. But now you can just phone up your pension provider and say, yes, I accept it's going to pay a lot of tax, but I want the whole lot in one go. And the pension provider will have to make that payment. So what have we done? We've created highly accessible wealth. And whenever you combine highly accessible wealth with a completely unsupervised power, where it's very difficult to know that things have been done badly in the first place, with vulnerability, then that is where you have major risk of financial abuse. And a lot of the comments that we've seen earlier on today in the chat, bereavement, life policies paying out, we're talking about that liquid wealth is available, and there is a huge store of liquid wealth in the pensions market. Now, we haven't seen the effect, we've maybe started to see the hints of the effect, but we haven't seen the effect of pensions freedom on lasting power of attorney abuse yet, because it happened in 2015. And so most people going into drawdown are going to be early into retirement. And so in 2015, imagine a cohort of people that were age 65. Well, they're now 70, 71, somewhere around that age. So cognitive impairment is going to be incredibly rare in that cohort of people that have made their retirement income decisions in this new default position of drawdown, where most people are going into drawdown. We know that because annuity sales have plummeted. So we have a lot of people who have a lot of highly accessible wealth. And at some point in the future, because combined with that, we've got a massive escalation in the number of powers of attorney that are in circulation. So there's something like more than 4 million registered powers of attorney in circulation. That doesn't mean there are 4 million people that are lacking mental capacity. Lots of these are registered at point of creation so that they're available to use immediately if a problem arises. That's sort of the default way that the lasting powers are done. So there's 4 million lasting powers of attorney in operation. There is billions of pounds I'm sure somebody on here will give me a more accurate number, probably trillions of pounds tied up in the pensions market that is now highly accessible. And we have an aging population that is living longer, which is a good thing. The rate of morbidity is not coming down. And we can expect, statistically, we know that from the age of 75 through to the age of 83, the level of cognitive impairment is going to increase in that cohort. And a significant proportion of those will have some level of cognitive impairment, such that actually by the age of 83, more likely than not to have a level of cognitive impairment that will impact on decision making, and attorneys will be acting in this regime where people are exposed to abuse. And I raised the concern. I got involved with the Transparency Task Force because of the good work that they were doing on pension scams. And I love the profession that I'm in, helping people plan their retirement, but the pensions industry can't really afford another massive scandal. And I genuinely believe that as we roll the clock forwards, unless we do something to address this, it will be another massive scandal. There are some solutions. There are some solutions baked into the system. A lasting power of attorney is a flexible document, so you can choose to add clauses into that document. There are solutions that we know work very, very well from the deputyship order. Ongoing supervision from somebody in a safeguarding role is baked into the deputyship order, which is the default system. Now, okay, the Office of the Public Guardian is massively overworked. They can't supervise these 4 million attorneys. That's part of the problem. But you can appoint a safeguarder. You can choose somebody to act independently in that role. Perhaps we should make that a default option that you take out, rather than something that you have to fight to find out about and put in if you pay for very, very good advice from somebody that's in the know in Solicitors for the Elderly. There is an annual deputy return, which is producing accounts. Attorneys have an obligation to produce accounts already, but nobody ever does because nobody ever checks it. And who says what those accounts should look like? So maybe setting some best practice around that would be a really, really sensible idea. And in the deputyship regime, there is a deputy bond that is mandatory. And there is now an attorney bond, which Lynn and her company have brought to market, but it's optional, which means only the good guys are going to take it out. If it was mandatory, then that would be a real safeguarding tool that would help repair the estate of somebody that suffered abuse. The consequences of the loss is so much more. You know, if you think about previously under annuity, if somebody's pension income was being stolen, if you put a stop to the abuse, they still have an income. Under the drawdown regime, the whole pot is gone in one transaction and it's never coming back. So I think the solutions fall into 3 broad categories. That is training. That is, I think, financial advisors and financial services institutions need to be better trained on what financial abuse looks like. It is a real theme of the regulator, which is good vulnerability, but I think we could do more. I think using the power of referrals. So referring, I think most lasting powers of attorney don't come about because people wake up and think, I must get a power of attorney. They come about because you have a conversation with a financial professional who says, have you thought about, or no, you can't do that, you need a, and they go off and either draft themselves or seek advice on that. So I think that opportunity to have a conversation early on in the process and say, you should be aware of safeguarding clauses and the importance of them and why you should put them into your document. And I take that to extreme. My view is there should be some sort of default. There's a concept in behavioral finance called default bias or anchoring, where if you present somebody and say, this is the normal thing to do, this is the status quo, do you want to change it from that? People tend to anchor on that. And at the moment, the status quo is an entirely blank, open, unprotected document that says, here, have the keys to my financial world, and you don't have to tell anyone what you do with them. So I think the status quo should be, here is a highly protective document with some sensible wordings. And if you want to take the wordings out, I strongly recommend seeking some proper advice so that you understand the impact of that, not go and pay for advice to add them in. So referrals, default bias awareness. I think the attorney bonds are an absolutely critical solution. That comes in my category of product. What can we do to just make this regime work more effectively? There are products that can do that, but you can only have a safeguarding tool if you've also got a transparency tool. You can't repair somebody's estate unless you know that that estate has gone wrong in the first place and that there is an abuser there committing abuse and stealing the money. So mechanisms for getting that information out into the hands of somebody that can raise concerns, and then very good mechanisms for that person to raise concerns to make sure that that gets properly investigated. But it all starts with transparency and advice products, if you like. You know, the legal profession often draft the lasting powers of attorney, but they see it as something all too often, something transactional. We've drawn the lasting power of attorney, we've got it registered, that's our job done. Maybe there could be innovative solutions in offering ongoing advice and mentoring to attorneys in the way that deputies get ongoing advice and mentoring from the Office of the Public Guardian, and that being seen as a good thing and a sensible thing to do. And finally, there's changing the rules, and I perhaps hold out less hope for that, but there is guidance, there is best practice, there is regulation, and then finally there is laws, and that's probably going to be the hardest thing to do. I don't know how much time I've spent, but that's my presentation, so I'm opening it up for questions.
That was absolutely perfect and very, very timely. By the way, those fish look gorgeous, don't they? Seb, thank you very, very much indeed. They're going to invite Kirsty to tell us a bit more about VRS, if Kirsty's happy to, Lynn Coombs to tell us more about security bonds, and Peter O'Donnell to chip in with anything. We've got some very good thoughts about most of the topics we cover. But let's go first of all to Kirsty. Kirsty, if you're still with us, would you like to take yourself off mute, introduce yourself, and tell everybody a little bit about what VRS is and does, if you can?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Andy. So yeah, I'm Kirsty. I'm from the Vulnerability Registration Service. My background is that I used to work for CIFAS, Leaders in Fraud Prevention, worked for them for about 9 years, starting within training, compliance, moving on to consumer protection, before unfortunately I was made redundant in March last year. But one of my projects that I managed at CIFAS was Protecting the Vulnerable, which is the free service that CIFAS offered to local authorities, solicitors, NHS Trust, for all of their clients who were subject to court protection orders. So individuals who didn't have the financial capacity to understand financial products. As a result of a restructure, CIFAS then put the product out to tender, and the Vulnerability Registration Service took on that product. So now as a result, I then hopped ship, went over from CIFAS to the Vulnerability Registration Service, where I'm still managing the same data set to help protect as many people as possible. So my job at the Vulnerability Registration Service is basically to engage lots of organisations about the VRS and the products, the service that we can offer. So we can offer organisations the ability to search the Vulnerability Registration Service to see if their clients have registered themselves as vulnerable or have been registered by another party, such as solicitors or NHS trusts or those sorts of organisations, as vulnerable due to their lack of capacity to understand financial products. So yeah, that's the Vulnerability Registration Service in a nutshell. We've got a couple of flags that we put on each record for how organisations should proceed when they match on this warning. So we have a refer flag, which basically means please contact me for further details about this warning, or a decline flag, which basically says please decline any products made in this person's name. And we also have a set of sub-flag categories as well, which just gives you a little bit more detail as to each individual's vulnerability needs. So if they're experiencing issues with debt, you've got a sub-flag for that. Or if they're experiencing gambling problems, you've got a sub-flag for that. So we've got about 13 sub-flags for that sort of information. And we're also looking to create a new sub-flag as well for individuals who could be at risk of coercion as well. So that's a very new one that we're looking at the moment, that we've created in partnership with Abused Men in Scotland, AMIS. So we're very excited about that new one to help as many people as possible. So in a nutshell, that's us.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. And you will have seen in the chat this idea that perhaps the ideas that Richard Emery's spoken about and what you do could be somehow connected. Do you see that potential for that?
Yeah, absolutely. He's already dropped me an email, bless him, with the information. So I've already forwarded that on to my directors, and we will definitely be in touch to set up a further meeting on how we can work together.
Wonderful.
But that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And again, Seb, thank you for a little push. Sometimes it's better to come from a third party rather than yourself, sort of saying, please let's get in touch. So really appreciate that, Seb. Thank you.
Rewarding and satisfying for the TTF to make the connections that we make, whether it's connections within the UK or between people in the UK and many other countries that we have a presence in now. Thank you, Kirsty. That was great. Really interesting. I didn't even know you existed. So that's fantastic. Let's go from Kirsty to Lynn. Lynn, tell everybody a little bit about what a security bond actually is, does, and its relevance to this particular market. Thank you so much.
Okay, my name's Lynn Coombs of Security Bonds Limited, and thank you again, Seb, for your support. The bond is to cover lasting and enduring powers of attorney and powers of attorney in Scotland that have either been registered or can be used. And one of the points Seb makes is quite an important one, in the fact that at the moment, because it's not mandatory, they'll only be bought by the good guys. They're not going to be looked at by anybody that's going to commit any kind of fraud on the attorneys. Now, one of the ways we've just tried to address that is to introduce a minimum premium. So we've gone down to a £5,000 security to reflect the donor's wish to have a level of cover that covers the honest mistake by the lay attorney. So that kind of gets over the bit of the conflict where you're saying, make a lasting power of attorney, appoint the people that you trust. Oh, by the way, here's a bond in case they do something wrong. This way, it's a small level of security that will cover an honest mistake. So basically, it's a lay attorney cover. And the attorney can't have made a profit from that mistake or allowed somebody else to do the same. And if they haven't done that, then there is cover underneath the bond for it. So if they don't apply for benefits or something like that, and there's a financial loss because of that. Now that cover actually only starts from £20 for the lifetime of a lasting power of attorney. So if it's in place for 10 years, it's a tiny, tiny amount per year. So that's where we're hoping to kind of promote it. And it might be a little bit more widely available, if you see what I mean. But yeah, until it's made mandatory, there's a huge hole. Deputies have had this kind of financial security for over 40 years. And they have oversight, and they have the Court of Protection, and they have the Office of the Public Guardian. And as Seb was saying, that with a lasting power of attorney, you have nothing. You make it, you can go online to the Office of the Public Guardian, and you can make a lasting power of attorney. That person that could be kind of coercing somebody to do that could be sitting in the same room, or actually, I'm not quite sure of the safeguards that stop somebody from actually doing it right in front of them or doing it instead of them. I don't know enough about it because I haven't applied for one. I've got a lasting power of attorney, and I went to a solicitor to make one. But having spoken to Seb quite a few times, I've realised that my lasting power of attorney isn't as good as it should be, and I need to do something about that. So you can make, I wouldn't say it's a lazy lasting power of attorney, but I didn't realise that you could safeguard it in different ways. So I'll be looking at mine again. If you haven't made a lasting power of attorney, you should, because the deputyship route is very expensive, but you do, as you know, Senior Judge Lush said, you do have the oversight of everybody helping you. So yes, we have a bond. Yes, it's available. Now it is terribly cheap, starting at just 20 quid. But it's whether it's ever going to be taken up in bulk and cover the people that actually need it.
I think I'm just going to pick up on something in the chat for our friends across the pond. An attorney in UK is somebody that is appointed under a lasting power of attorney to act on your behalf.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It does not mean a lawyer.
No. No, certainly not. It can be.
But it could be. It could be a lawyer that's appointed, but yes, very often it's friend, family.
Yes.
The person down the road that has befriended you because you've suddenly come into money and look vulnerable. It could be.
Well, exactly, Seb. Exactly right. Yeah. And the person making it might be wanting to save their family all the hassle, and somebody's very kindly come forward to help them. But, you know, if there's nothing in place and that family doesn't live in the UK, They've got no way of knowing what's going on. And the lasting power of attorney is all powerful. You can do anything with it. And more importantly, if you're an attorney, you don't have to share what you're doing with the family. It's a nice thing to do if you're an honest and lovely attorney, but you don't have to. You've got no legal right to keep that family involved. You can cut them out completely and do what you like. So it's very powerful, and it should have the safeguards that Seb was talking about. And I do believe it took me 5 years to get this bond out there. And I've been passionate about it for many years, knowing that I've been dealing with deputy bonds for many years as well, knowing that there was always a safety net for P, and there isn't anything at all for the lasting powers of attorney. And that, quite frankly, that kind of shocked me.
Lynn, thank you very much and interest a lot of people, not only on this call, but also out in the marketplace more generally. Excellent input from Lynn there. Super stuff. Mr. Peter O'Donnell, any thoughts of wisdom from yourself? You normally put a smile on my face with one idea or another. Your thoughts, please, Peter. Anything to share with us today?
I'm really looking forward to stopping work so I don't have to agonize over all the destruction it's done to innocent people. I wake up in a cold sweat with anger at the authorities and the agencies. One of the things I'd love to see is, because we help people get compensation, is the authorities talking to us. We know more horror stories than anybody. They tend to get anecdotal information and they don't talk to the people who deal directly with the victims. In particular, people who are screwed by the involvement of financial advisors recommending unregulated investments for pensions, and then going into insolvency, and the FCA says, well, they're no longer regulated, we're not interested. And the insolvency practitioners say, well, we've got nothing to do with financial services and mis-selling, we're not interested. And so the clients fall into a hole that they don't know how to get out of. In particular, they don't know they were dealing with a financial advisor. We're doing one right now that where the people didn't know that the company was actually financial services regulated, and they were selling investments in student accommodation that was a scam. There was no money went into building anything. It just terrifies me at the fact that this is an industry, the financial service industry, that keeps on taking and doesn't pay.
Thank you, Peter. A very somber set of thoughts from Peter O'Donnell there. Thank you very much indeed. Seb, I'm going to go to you, please, for any final thoughts on your session, which was very informative indeed. I've heard it a few times now, but every time I managed to pick up a new bit of insight from it. Seb, any final comments from you, please? Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you everybody for attending today. I don't sell or recommend security bonds. I just think they're a really good idea. I don't write or draft or recommend lasting powers of attorney. I just want my clients to have them, but I want them to have safe ones. So I want to point them to lawyers that will put safeguarding clauses in, and I wish all financial services firms would do that. And that, I think, is something that is within our power as an industry. You know, we don't have to wait for government to change their mind on this. We don't have to wait for regulator to change their mind. We can make a start by defining best practice and sharing it with all of our colleagues. But that will only help a small portion of the people out there. That won't get to all 4 million attorneys that are in circulation. So ultimately, we have to come up with a change to the system. And if we don't, then I think in 4 years' time, as people age, what will happen is that there'll be increased levels of cognitive impairment. Then we will regret the opportunity not to take more decisive action now.
I wholeheartedly agree, Seb. Since you spoke in January last year, I can just see this problem looming on the horizon, getting bigger and getting more and more imminent. Lots of money, lots of vulnerability, lots of access, lots of motivation by unscrupulous, unprofessionals, potentially family members, or just out and out criminals doing what they do. This is a really big problem, folks, for society as a whole. And of course, as well as it being you know, the public at large. We're also talking about, you know, our mums and dads, our aunts and uncles, us, as and when we get to that stage. It's going to happen to us all. Can I please invite everybody to put their hands together to thank Seb for his presentation and for his impetus behind this whole initiative. Well done, Seb. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're going to be wrapping up in just a couple of minutes. I think I'm going to guide us into precisely a correct time close, which is a bit unusual for me, so I'm rather chuffed about that myself. I'd like to thank everybody, all of our speakers, of course. So just to recap, we had Paul Greenwood to begin with, and Ken Kivenko, Richard Emery, Seb Elwell. So one Canadian, one person from California, USA, and 2 Brits doing a great job between them. We've also had input from the likes of Lynn from Kirsty and others as well. We've got the impetus already happening about the all-party parliamentary group on protecting the wealth for the vulnerable elderly. Enormous thanks to those people that have volunteered already to step forward, which is wonderful. We'll work together to produce the white paper, to get the ball rolling on recruiting the parliamentarians. Having done this twice before, we know how to go about getting an APPG up and running and making it effective. So it's been a really, really successful session from my point of view tonight. I'd like to close by thanking our head of events. Alexandra works so hard putting all these events together. Can we please show our appreciation to Alexandra, because I want her to know how much we appreciate the work that she does as well. Well done, Alexandra. Very, very well done indeed. Okay, almost to the second, folks. We're going to be closing on time. So thank you all very much indeed. Have a good rest of your evening, stroke day, depending upon where you are in the world. It's lovely to bring together people from different parts of our planet, all talking about things that we can all relate to, this need to protect the vulnerable elderly, help them to keep the wealth that they own and need to cherish for the long term. Thanks all very much. We'll wrap it up there. Cheers, guys and girls. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.